everybody, this is my thoughts on E3 for this year. I do this kind of video every year, so I just kind of give a general overview of what I thought about the conferences and some of the games that got announced and that sort of thing. And to that end, I do have a list of the various conferences and what was included in them, so I'll go ahead and get right into it. But before I do that, I do want to mention that the gameplay in the background is of For Honor, because it was one of the games that was actually talked about during E3 this year, particularly during the Ubisoft Conference, where they announced they were going to be doing some upcoming content for it. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get things kicked off, and we'll go ahead and start with the very first conference that was shown off, which was EA's conference. And the EA conference was, for lack of a better term, a complete shit show. It was absolutely pathetic. It was extremely boring. There was almost no gameplay shown of just about anything. As always, they focused way too much on their sports games, which pretty much nobody gives a crap about at E3. So, what does it matter? The people who are going to buy FIFA and Madden are always going to buy FIFA and Madden every year, no matter what anyway. So, what's the point of showing things off at E3 for them? They're not even watching E3 anyway. But, aside from that, they teased a bit of Battlefield 5, which they didn't show any gameplay of, oddly enough, at that conference, but they did have a bunch of demo footage shown off later on in just various YouTuber videos and such. I watched some of the gameplay. As far as I can tell, it's basically Battlefield 1, only it's set in World War II, and it somehow looks worse. I'll reserve full judgment until I actually get my hands on it and play it, but I'm not remotely optimistic for it, let's put it that way. Aside from Battlefield 5, they did announce that Respawn is working on a new Star Wars game entitled Jedi Fallen Order. There was no footage, there was no trailer, it was literally just Vince Zampella out in the audience, and they interviewed him for a very brief period of time, basically saying that the game is in development. It centers around a Jedi who somehow escaped the purges, and that's kind of it. They didn't really give us any details on it other than it's something in development, so I guess look forward to that at E3 next year, maybe, I don't know. Moving on from that, they made some changes to EA Access, but I don't really care about that because I don't subscribe to EA Access and I probably never will, so there's not really much point to me caring too much about that. If that's your kind of thing, then whatever, but I don't really care. Of course, they did talk about Star Wars Battlefront 2, and they somewhat acknowledged the very negative reception of the game, but the updates they have made to it and that they're bringing to it are too little too late as far as I'm concerned. There's basically no saving that piece of garbage, so no matter what updates they put out, it really doesn't matter. Aside from those, they did show off a couple of indie games that they're supporting, one of which is the sequel to Unravel. It's Unravel 2, and it's now a co-op game, and you both play as characters made out of yarn, and it's basically a puzzle platformer, so I don't really care. I'm very sick of puzzle platformers. Then, of course, they unveiled a new one called Sea of Solitude, which the only thing I really know about it right now is that it has a very interesting looking art style, and that the studio is from Berlin, and that's pretty much it. So, I'll keep an eye on that, see if I can find more details about it in the future, but it didn't seem like something I'd be all that interested in, to be perfectly honest. Then, of course, there was the massive slap in the face to anybody who used to be a fan of Command & Conquer, because it wasn't just enough for EA to kill the franchise with a game as shitty as Command & Conquer 4. Oh no, they have to zombify it as a really shitty-looking mobile game, which is undoubtedly going to be a complete cash grab. So this so-called Command & Conquer Rivals is completely off of my radar, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to earn EA quite a lot of vitriol from the Command & Conquer fans, although it's not like they give a crap anyway. And then, of course, they closed out the conference with a big thing about Anthem, which, as far as I can tell, is basically Destiny with mech suits. I mean, it could be interesting, or it could not be. Knowing EA, it's probably not going to be, but I will reserve judgment until I actually play the thing. So we'll see on that, but nothing I saw in the EA conference, or really any of the footage up to this point that they've shown of Anthem, has really inspired much confidence. So the EA conference in general was just complete garbage. They didn't show anything that seemed all that interesting. What little they did show that seemed vaguely interesting, they didn't show enough of, and they just focused way too much on sports like they always do. So E3 got off to a really crappy start as far as the conferences go, and luckily Microsoft redeemed the whole thing because the Microsoft conference was actually pretty solid for the most part. They focused almost exclusively on games this year, and they showed off about 50 or so of them, which was welcome to see because Microsoft has had a problem with that for the past several years. And while a few of those games we've already seen, like Ori and the Will of the Wisps, or Metro Exodus, or Crackdown 3, they also showed off some re-releases of older games like Nier Automata, which is getting its kind of gold edition or whatever on console as well, and of course the Xbox release of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Black Desert Online, and Tales of Vesperia getting a sort of definitive edition upgrade that's coming out, I believe, on Xbox One, PC, and PS4. But I don't know the exact details of it. But I digress. They also showed off quite a few new games that they haven't shown at their conferences before, which were certainly interesting to see. The first thing that they showed is there's another Halo game. Because of course there's another Halo game. It's going to be one of the big drivers of the Xbox platform no matter what. It's called Halo Infinite. And that's basically all we got. So there's a new Halo game. It's called Halo Infinite. Yay. Aside from that, they showed off a new From Software game called Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, which looks to be a pretty fast-paced hack-and-slash kind of game, but not quite in the same vein as the Soulsborne series, which everybody seems to love so much. So, we'll see what happens with that. I probably will not pick that up at full price, but I'll keep an eye on it, see what the gameplay is like, and if it's too much like the previous Souls games that I've just found so incredibly boring, then I probably won't bother with it, but we'll see on that. And they also showed off, of course, some more Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which I don't really care about because I didn't like the first game. And they showed Fallout 76, which consisted of just a trailer for it, so there wasn't really much to go on there. That would be reserved for the Bethesda conference, but I'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, moving on, they did show that there is a new game in the Life is Strange universe titled The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, which I don't really have much to say about because I'm really not all that familiar with Life is Strange. I've barely even played the demo of the first Life is Strange. I still need to get around to finishing the actual game, and I still need to get around to playing Before the Storm as well, so I've got a lot of catching up to do before I even consider Captain Spirit at all. Then they had a fairly extended bit about Kingdom Hearts 3, showing a bunch of gameplay footage from the Frozen area, among other things. And at that point, I muted the stream, set it aside, and waited for that bit to finish because not only do I not give a shit about Kingdom Hearts, it actually actively irritates me because it's the perfect storm of things I can't stand. So, I just waited for it to finish, and then moved on to the next thing, which, funnily enough, was some Sea of Thieves content, which is amusing to me because, as far as I know, basically nobody plays that anymore, and it just came out not too long ago. So, I guess they are trying to do damage control at this point? I don't know. Anyway, moving on, they did show a single-player teaser for Battlefield 5 for the war stories they're doing, and just like with Battlefield 1, they are taking them deadly seriously, so it's probably going to be just as much of a shit show as Battlefield 1 was. I guess we'll just wait and see on that. They showed off Forza Horizon 4, which I don't care about because I don't care about racing games. They said that We Happy Few is actually getting a release date, so I'll take a look at that whenever the full version comes out. They also showed some faux gameplay. I say that because it's the typical Ubisoft trailer nonsense of them showing gameplay and then having people talking over it as if they're actually playing it. The problem there being that basically nobody talks like that when they're actually playing the game. Regardless, it looks much the same as the Division 1, so we'll just wait and see on that. I did sign up for the beta. Hopefully the beta does not have an NDA on it, so hopefully I can do a video on that. I will eventually take a look at the full version of the Division 2 as well, but I'm really not looking forward to it because the Division 1 was just garbage, even with the updates that they put out for it. So I'm really not expecting much out of Division 2 right now. But who knows, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised with it. I doubt it, but maybe I will be. Moving on, they did some things about Xbox Game Pass, which I don't really care about right now, so there's not much to talk about there. And they showed off some Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which looks much the same as the previous two Reboot games, only now Lara is basically a killing machine, even more than she already was. So we'll see how it turns out. I probably won't get it on launch, but I will eventually take a look at it. After that, they had a skateboarding game called Session, and since I don't care about skateboarding, I don't really care about that game either. They showed the Xbox release of Black Desert Online. It's an MMO, therefore I don't care. They showed a trailer for Devil May Cry 5, which I still need to catch up on the other games in the series, actually. But it looks like they're trying to take it a bit more back to the older style of Devil May Cry, as opposed to the faux edgy nonsense that DMC was. So we'll see how that goes, but again, I have a lot of catching up to do on Devil May Cry before I even consider that one. They showed some content for Cuphead, which I still haven't played yet, so again, gotta catch up on that before I consider the new content. They showed a sort of action-adventure, almost an old-school Zelda-like game called Tunic, which seems a bit interesting. I'll probably take a look at it eventually. We'll just wait and see on that. And they showed an anime crossover game called Jump Force, which, from what I can tell, looks a lot like J-Star's Victory Versus. Which, if you're not familiar with it, and who could blame you because it's a pretty niche game, is basically a crossover brawling game of various Shonen Jump characters. And I do have a copy of it for PS4. I will be taking a look at it eventually, and it's just kind of ridiculous. But we'll see how Jump Force turns out. If nothing else, it'll just be kind of fun to make fun of, anyway. Moving on, they showed off some Dying Light 2, which as far as I'm concerned is only interesting because Chris Avellone is working on it, and the fact that they actually are trying to make choices matter. So I might take a look at it. I'm not really looking forward to it because it's a zombie game, and even if the zombies aren't the primary influence, it's still a zombie game, and it's still a sequel to Dying Light, which frankly was not very good either. So we'll see how it goes. I'll look at it just out of respect for Chris Avallone's writing, but I'm, again, not really looking forward to it that much. Then they showed that they're doing a reboot of Battletoads, which kind of surprised me, but hey, it could be interesting. I wasn't really a big fan of Battletoads, though. And they showed Just Cause 4, which I'm kind of surprised they're bringing out a new one so soon after the previous one, because they're all pretty much the same kind of game since Just Cause 2. I still have some catching up to do on that series as well, so we'll see about that. They showed some really dumb-looking thing called Gears Pop, which is all about those minifigure kind of things. I'm not looking forward to that at all. And then, of course, they showed off Gears of War 5, which sure looks like a Gears of War game. About all I can say for it. I still haven't played Gears of War Judgment all the way through, and I still haven't played Gears of War 4, so catching up to do before I get to 5 again. And of course it seemed like that was going to be their big show closer up until Phil Spencer came out there to deliver the final closing of the show, and he had this smirk on his face. You could tell he was saving something for the absolute last. Which turned out to be something I've been waiting on news for years, which is Cyberpunk 2077. Now, the only thing that got shown to the public was the in-engine cinematic trailer, which is certainly mildly disappointing in the sense of, oh, we didn't get to see any gameplay and we didn't get to see a release date or anything like that, but we did get to see the game's aesthetic, which perfectly nails the high-tech, low-life feel that Cyberpunk is supposed to go for. Now, I will admit, the original announcement teaser for the game really wasn't very good, but this one kicked ass. And I am very much looking forward to the full game whenever it ends up coming out. As far as I'm concerned, they can take all the time they need to make that game, because it needs to be done right. And from what I've been seeing coming out of the E3 demo that was done behind closed doors, it's shaping up very nicely. And as far as its place in E3 goes, Cyberpunk pretty much redeemed the entire expo, because apart from it, there really wasn't all that much that was really interesting. The expo did have its fair share of cringe-inducing moments, however, and one of those was the start of the Bethesda Conference. Because they started with Rage 2, and they had their musical performance that went on for way too long. And it was just migraine-inducing. At any rate, once they finally finished their musical presentation, then they actually came on there and talked about the game itself and showed off some of the gameplay and such. It looks pretty uninspired, to be perfectly honest. It's like they tried to ape Borderlands way too much, and yet they don't go for the full-on cartoon art style that Borderlands has. Instead, they just went with the same kind of art style that Rage 1 had, but tried to make it funnier, and they didn't really succeed all that well with it. But I will reserve full judgment until I play the game itself. The problem there being that I'm just completely burned out on open world games at this point. Pretty much everything seems like it needs to be open world these days, and I'm just tired of it. Because most games these days don't need to be open world. They just throw a bunch of random crap in there to try to justify the fact that they're making open world games that are really nothing more than just a bunch of busy work, and there's not much to them. So we'll see how it goes. The first Rage wasn't even very good. It was really more of a tech demo than anything else, but Rage 2 just does not inspire confidence at all. Later on in the Bethesda conference, they had Elder Scrolls Legends, which is a card game, therefore I don't care. They had a bit about the Elder Scrolls Online Somerset, and you guys know how I am about Elder Scrolls Online at this point, so I don't feel the need to talk about that. They had a teaser for the sequel to Doom 2016 called Doom Eternal, and it was showing not really anything but hell on earth, and that was about it. So, it's basically Doom 2 remade, much like Doom 2016 was a reboot of the franchise. So, that stands to reason, but I'm not excited for it. I mean, they didn't really do a very good job with the previous Doom game, so I don't see them doing a particularly good job with the new one either. They talked a bit about Quake Champions, which I do have a copy of that. I actually had it before they decided to make it free on Steam there for a while, but I haven't really gotten around to going over it very much yet. So we'll see how that goes. I'm hoping to do a full review once the game launches in full. But until then, I'll see if I can do an MTO on it at some point for the early access release. Then they talked about the Prey Moon Crash DLC. I still need to finish the base game, so the game itself seems interesting so far. What little I've played of Prey, the new one, I mean, not the old one. I'm not really interested in the Moon Crash DLC precisely because they used the words that could not have made me less interested, which are basically procedural generation, where it's basically a roguelite kind of thing where you just continually go in and do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. That's pretty much the definition of insanity right there. Anyway, they announced 2 new Wolfenstein games, one of which is a VR game that's called Cyberpilot, and I don't care about it because it's a VR game. And the other of which is called Youngblood, and you play as either of B.J. Blazkowicz's twin daughters in the 80s fighting Nazis in France, apparently. So, we'll see how that goes. I can't really say I'm excited for it, given how crappy Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus was. But we'll see. Maybe they learn their lessons. I doubt it, but we'll see. Then they had a segment where Todd Howard came out and started talking. And, of course, he was doing his typical thing of trying to hype things up and actually ended up acknowledging some faults, which was kind of mind-blowing. I didn't expect him to do that. One of which was the running joke of them just re-releasing Skyrim over and over and over again on pretty much every system that you can imagine. With the Skyrim Very Special Edition re-release joke that they did, which I will admit was actually pretty funny. They had Keegan-Michael Key on there doing all kinds of goofy things with Skyrim for the Amazon Echo, which it turns out they actually did release an app for that, which amuses the living hell out of me. But kudos to them for at least acknowledging the running jokes and such. But then they went and ruined all of that goodwill that they had just built up by showing Fallout 76, which is going to be a total shit show. Absolutely nobody asked for a multiplayer-only Fallout game where it's basically like playing Rust or DayZ or any of those kind of survival games where it's a light survival thing, where it's both cooperative and competitive at the same time. And especially given the tools they are providing that will undoubtedly be used for excessive amounts of griefing, There's absolutely no chance in hell it's ever going to be anything remotely resembling decent, let alone good. But since it feels like it's my curse at this point to play the Fallout and Elder Scrolls series until the end of fucking time, I'm still gonna have to take a look at it at some point, I'm sure. Just to confirm that. They said they're going to have a beta out to test everything out, and that's probably when they're going to realize, oh, we've made a huge mistake. But they've gone too far at that point for it to matter. Hell, at this point, I don't even care that they're stomping all over the established Fallout lore and just making up whatever bullshit they want at this point, because you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. Bethesda has taken the series, they're gonna run with it, and at this point, there's no use lamenting the loss of one of the greatest role-playing game series ever made, because it's never going to get better at this point. So at this point, we need to just deliver the eulogy for Fallout and just move on with our lives, because there is no chance in hell it's ever going to get better now. Speaking of not ever getting better, the Elder Scrolls series, which they did mention, with a so-called fully featured Elder Scrolls game for mobile. It's called The Elder Scrolls Blades, and it looks astoundingly shitty. Because what we really want out of Elder Scrolls is a phone game that you can play in portrait mode. Todd was very insistent that that was a very good feature, that you could play it in portrait mode. I think Todd has lost his grip on reality at this point. Anyway, I'll probably take a look at that too, because eventually they're going to release it on PC, and oh, I'm sure that's going to be terrible. Then they teased two things that they're working on. First is their first new IP in 25 years, at least from Bethesda Game Studios, I mean, which is Starfield. They revealed nothing about it other than it takes place in space. I have no confidence in it at this point, so there's really not much point in me even talking about it, because they didn't say much about it either. And then they also teased the Elder Scrolls 6, and everybody suddenly thought that Bethesda won E3 from that. If for some utterly baffling reason you are actually excited for the Elder Scrolls 6 after the absolute shit show that was Skyrim, well, I can't help you at this point. There's no saving you. I'm sorry. So as expected, the Bethesda conference was just headache-inducing, and then you move on to something that is at least somewhat amusing, which was the Devolver Digital Conference, where they did the same thing they did last E3, which was make fun of E3. And it was pretty entertaining, actually. They did announce 3 games, or at least show off 3 games, 2 of which had already been announced from what I understand. Those were Scum, which is kind of a survival shooter thing, and then My Friend Pedro, which is a kind of weird and wacky action platformer. But then they made the big announcement, which everybody thought was a joke, until it showed up on the Steam store, and they were not joking, which was Metal Wolf Chaos XD, a remaster of the From Software Neo classic Metal Wolf Chaos, a game so fuck yeah that it had to be made in Japan. I honestly never thought I would see the day that it got a Western release, but that is now approaching, and I'm actually excited for it, because a game that ridiculous just needs to be played. But anyway, I digress. Apart from the 3 games that they showed, the rest of the Devolver Digital event was just a bunch of ridiculous goofiness that, frankly, I needed after the Bethesda conference, so that actually ended up fulfilling a very nice role of at least being very entertaining. Which is a lot more than I can say for the Square Enix event, which basically just showed off all the stuff that they already had showed previously in the conference, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, the Nier Automata re-release, Kingdom Hearts 3, Just Cause 4... But then they showed a few new things, at least for being covered at E3 anyway, which were an update for Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood and the Monster Hunter World crossover with it, along with Dragon Quest XI, because we need yet another frickin' Dragon Quest game, of course. And then a new game from them called Babylon's Fall, which, as far as I can tell, is another JRPG or hack and slash kind of thing. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm not particularly excited for it because they didn't really show much other than just a cinematic trailer for it. Then they talked a bit about Octopath Traveler, which I'm not really all that interested in either. And they teased something called The Quiet Man, which I'm not sure what to think about that right now. It's kind of weird and they haven't showed a lot of it. So I'm going to look for more information on that. It seems like it could be interesting, but given that they didn't show so much of it, it's kind of hard to say for sure. And of course they ended with Kingdom Hearts 3, because of course they're going to end it with Kingdom Hearts 3. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on here. The next major event was the Ubisoft Conference, but before that there was a video from Limited Run Games which showed off some of their upcoming physical releases of indie games and such. And oh, was the cringe strong with that one, so that was actually kind of painful to watch. But all the stuff they showed there was just physical releases of stuff that either had already come out or was coming out soon, so it didn't really matter all that much. But then we got to the Ubisoft conference, and the cringe continued because they started with Just Dance. Because, of course, they started with Just Dance. Probably because nobody's interested in Just Dance, so they just got it out of the way first. So that was actually painful to watch. And then they did Beyond Good and Evil 2, which, again, they didn't show any gameplay or anything. They just showed another cinematic trailer for it. But I have no idea what they're trying to do with Beyond Good and Evil 2, but we'll see. I still need to finish the first game. I really haven't played much of it at all. So I need that context before going into Beyond Good and Evil 2. They went over some updates that are coming up for Rainbow Six Siege, so we got more of that. And that game has been getting just kind of better and better, although they've kind of plateaued on that now. With the new operators, they haven't really been doing anything all that exciting, so it's not really affected the meta as much as they might hope. And I would hope that they actually figure out ways to improve the meta without making things too gimmicky like they're starting to do. So we'll see how that goes. I may do another video on Rainbow Six Siege at some point, we'll see. But regardless, they did some stuff regarding that. Then they talked about a new Trials game, which I don't care about because I've never really liked the Trials games. Although it was certainly silly, so at least there was that. It's called Trials Rising, for those of you who are interested. They had a bit about The Division 2, which, it's The Division, but with a bit of changes here and there. Woo. Again, I'll just wait until I actually get my hands on it to judge it fully. But then after that, they had something for Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which is called Donkey Kong Adventure. I think it's a DLC, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So either way, I don't really care all that much because I don't have a Switch. And at this point, I really don't have much of a reason to get one. So until I have a good reason to get a Switch, then that doesn't really matter all that much to me. After that, they showed off a bit of Skull and Bones, which I am waiting for. It looks like it might be Sea of Thieves, except not garbage. So we'll see how that goes. I did sign up for the beta a while back, but I've never heard back on that yet. And they have pushed that back to next year, so we'll see. But regardless, it can't be much worse than Sea of Thieves, right? Right? Anyway, moving on. They had the new game from Elijah Wood's company called Transference, which looks a bit strange because it is a combination of FMV and kind of a first-person exploration horror kind of thing. Now that genre is not really my cup of tea. I've always found it rather boring, but we'll see how Transference goes. I'm probably not going to pick it up on launch, but it does seem like the kind of thing that I might be pleasantly surprised by. Again, we'll just see on that. Then, of course, they did Starlink Battle for Atlas, which is the Switch, and I believe it's also on other consoles as well, game that you hook up various toys to, and that manages to have effects in-game. Seems like a terrible idea, honestly, so I don't foresee that being anything remotely resembling decent. Then we get to the point where For Honor becomes very relevant for this video, which is that they have a big content update coming, which is called Marching Fire. And it introduces Chinese heroes. And I'm not sure where they're going to fit into the meta, but suffice to say, it's nice to see them kind of doubling down on For Honor and trying to make it as good as they possibly can. I mean, they did do some changes to the gear system, they did put in dedicated servers, but I feel like they haven't quite done enough with the gear system yet, because it still affects gameplay pretty noticeably. and that's not something you want out of a gear system that's based entirely on leveling. Because it means that you've got people who've simply played the game longer, who aren't necessarily any better than you, who automatically have an advantage, not just because they have experience, but because their gear is simply better than what you've got. And that's just an inherent problem with a game that's trying to be competitive like For Honor is. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what they do with it from here on out, but as you can probably see from the gameplay footage, it's been a while since I've played For Honor, and there's very good reasons for that. Anyway, moving on, they of course showed The Crew 2, which I honestly don't know who's interested in that game, because I don't know a single person who actually liked The Crew 1, so I can't really say I'm excited for it. I don't like racing games, I never have, and I probably never will. And then they showed the new Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which takes a more supernatural route than the previous games, except for Origins, from what I understand. And you can choose between either a male or female protagonist, and you just run around ancient Greece and do all kinds of wacky things. So I'm not going to pick it up on launch, but I will eventually take a look at it. I do still have to take a look at Assassin's Creed Syndicate and Origins. I do have a copy of both of those, but I just haven't gotten around to them yet, because I'm kind of burned out on open world games right now. At any rate, they eventually will happen. Eventually I'll take a look at Assassin's Creed Odyssey. At the very least, it'll be cool to just wander around ancient Greece and just see what the Ubisoft art team can do with it. Because if nothing else, they always do a fantastic job rendering the setting. And that was where the Ubisoft Conference ended, and I was actually surprised because it wasn't anywhere near as cringy as it has been for the past several years, although they did have that bit at the beginning with Just Dance. But regardless, they've actually improved the conference. It kind of blew my mind. Anyway, moving on to the big thing that I was looking forward to and was ultimately very disappointed by, which was the PC Gaming Show. The only things I can remember off the top of my head from that are that they talked about a bunch of stuff that Sega is bringing to PC, like Shenmue 1 and 2, Shining Resonance Refrain, and the big one as far as I'm concerned, they're finally bringing the Yakuza series to PC. A lot of people have been waiting for that for a long time, and they're finally being rewarded for their patience, so that's actually a very good thing. And they finally have Yakuza 0 up on Steam as well, and guess what? It's $20, which is a lot less than what you have to pay for it on console right now. Hopefully they bring the rest to PC as soon as possible. I do know that they're working on getting Kiwami on PC as well, but I actually picked that up on PS4. It's the only Yakuza game I own, actually. And that's precisely because it takes absolutely forever for prices to go down on PS4, so I'm glad to see it's finally coming to PC where I can actually afford to pick it up. Anyway, that was a big announcement, but the other big thing they talked about was The Walking Dead, because the final season of Telltale's Walking Dead is finally coming up, and I still need to get around to playing A New Frontier, but whatever. I will, of course, do the same thing I always do with the Walking Dead games or any of the Telltale episodic games, which is wait until all of the episodes out before I do a video on them, so just be aware of that. Moving on, they did have a bit where they talked about Star Citizen, and I'll be honest with you, at this point, I feel like Star Citizen is just a scam. It's just a way for them to get money out of it, and I see absolutely no chance that the game's ever going to come out. And the sad part is, all I want out of that is just Squadron 42. Just the single-player part. That's all I want out of Star Citizen, and yet it's taking absolutely forever for that to come out, because they want to do all the MMO bullshit first. So at this point, honestly, I don't even care anymore. Whenever Squadron 42 comes out, it'll come out, and then I'll take a look at it then. But until then, as far as I'm concerned, Star Citizen is just a scam, and it's pretty much entirely off my radar. Anyway, moving on, I honestly don't remember much else about the PC Gaming Show. Most of the games they showed were either stuff that didn't really interest me all that much, or that just didn't leave a lasting impression. One of the few that did was 2 Point Hospital, which is basically a successor to Theme Hospital, so that might be fairly amusing. But other than that, I can't really say I'm excited for the likes of, say, Maverick's Proving Grounds, which is yet another Battle Royale game, which amuses the hell out of me. I haven't played a single one of those yet, and yet I'm already tired of that genre. That should tell you how annoying it is that these games just keep popping up over and over and over again right now. So, again, I can't really say I'm excited for that sort of thing. And most of the stuff they showed, either I've already talked about, like Killing Floor 2 updates or Warframe updates, and I just don't really have much interest in it. They also showed a few things that I already have talked about, like Just Cause 4, but they did show some Hitman 2, which might be interesting, because it looks like they decided that the episodic format doesn't really work so well, and they are going back to the more traditional Hitman style, which is always nice. And, of course, it's got all kinds of just silly things in it, like you can beat people to death with a fish, which amuses the living hell out of me, so I'll pick that up eventually, but probably not at full price. Which is something I can't say for Overkill's The Walking Dead, because Overkill has proven to me that they don't know what they're doing. Because Payday 1 and 2 both sucked, and then I played their other game called The Raid, which is basically Payday but World War II, and it was somehow even worse, although apparently they didn't develop that in-house. Regardless, they've proven to me they don't know what they're doing, so why would I be even remotely interested in yet another damn zombie game that happens to be made by them? That's just absurd. And then, of course, there were other bits and pieces here and there, like Star Control Origins, which was announced a while ago, but they decided to do a bit of talking about it and show off some of it there. And I still haven't played the first couple of games, actually, so I still need to get around to that. That's part of my problem with a lot of these games that are either sequels or reboots or such. A lot of times I either haven't played the originals, or I just haven't finished them yet. So I just need to get around to doing that before I consider the new ones. But anyway, point is that I can barely remember anything other than those handful of things for the PC gaming show, even though they showed quite a bit more than just those games. So that should tell you something. I mean, hell, I actually have a list of every single game that was covered during the PC gaming show, and yet I can't remember most of them. That's how forgettable most of them were. And speaking of forgettable, let's go ahead and get to what a lot of people were probably waiting for, which was the Sony conference, which showed barely anything, actually. It was actually surprising. They showed a bit of the new expansion for Destiny 2 called Forsaken. It's basically Destiny 2's equivalent of the Taken King. I'm sure I'll look at it eventually, but right now I just don't really have much interest in it, because I still need to get through the other two DLCs, which I finally picked up because they went on sale for pretty cheap, but I'm not really excited for it, so let's just put it that way. Then they had a pretty extended bit about The Last of Us Part 2, which, sure looks like The Last of Us. About all I can say for it. I haven't finished the first game yet. In fact, the first game was kind of boring so far. So we'll see how it goes, but let's face it, you have to have played the first Last of Us to really get anything out of the sequel. It's just the way it's gonna be. The same can't be said for the next big game they showed, which was Ghost of Tsushima, which is kind of a hack-and-slash action-adventure thing, and it actually looks pretty neat, but I probably still won't pick that up at full price. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. It might be something that I actually want to pick up, but until I actually can see more proper gameplay of it, I'm not really completely sold on it yet. Then, of course, they showed off a new Remedy game called Control, which is a third-person action game, kind of in a similar vein to Quantum Break in terms of mechanics, it looks like. But they didn't really reveal a whole lot of it at E3, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. You guys know me and Remedy games at this point. I'm a big fan of them. So I'm looking forward to this, but I'm still going to wait for more details before I start to get excited about it. Because Quantum Break was an interesting idea, it just didn't work very well. So they are fallible, but they at least do interesting things that pretty much nobody else tries to do. So there's that. And of course, there was the Resident Evil 2 remake, where they're taking it seriously. I'm sorry, but Resident Evil should under no circumstances ever be taken seriously. The only enjoyable games in the series are 1 and 4, and the entire reason for that is that they don't take themselves seriously. Okay, let's be fair here. 5 doesn't really take itself seriously either, but it's just a crappy game, so that kind of cancels that out. Anyway, point is that Resident Evil 2 Remake is taking itself seriously. It's probably going to be pretty boring, honestly. Then there was a game called Trover Saves the Universe, which honestly I don't remember a single thing about, so there's not really much to say there. And then, of course, they talked about Kingdom Hearts again, because that's one of their big things they're banking on right now. I'm so sick of hearing about Kingdom Hearts. They showed off another trailer for Death Stranding, which I mean, as far as I can tell, it's basically Amazon Prime Simulator, because you deliver packages from what it looks like. And that's kind of it. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on in Death Stranding, because they focus so much on the cinematic and not really on actually showing you what the game is like. So, I'm still going to keep an eye on it. It looks like it's going to be at least an interesting game, but I still have no idea what it's about, honestly. Moving on. Nioh 2 got announced. Okay, it's yet another Souls-like kind of thing, so whoop-de-doo. Then they showed off the new Spider-Man game, which looks a lot like the Arkham series, and you guys know me at this point in the Arkham series, I tend to find them boring. So I guess we'll see how it goes, but I'm not really excited for the Spider-Man game. And they teased a new game from Software that's apparently a VR game called Deracine. And they didn't really show much of anything about it, so there wasn't much to talk about there. And that was the entirety of the Sony conference this year. It was actually legitimately baffling just how few things they showed. And what they did show was either stuff we already knew about and were just interested in seeing a bit more of, or things that really aren't all that interesting. So it just ended up being a complete disappointment, like it usually is, but even more so than usual. And then, of course, there was the final conference, the Nintendo Direct event, which showed off a fair few games for the Switch, several of which are just re-releases of other games, like, say, FIFA, or Minecraft, or Ark, or Wasteland 2, or Dragon Ball FighterZ, which I do have a copy of that, by the way, so I'll take a look at Dragon Ball FighterZ. Not on the Switch, obviously, but on PS4. Anyway, they had a bunch of stuff like that, so I'm not really going to cover that. But they did show off a new mech game called Demon X Machina, which was kind of interesting. We don't get a lot of mecha games anymore, so we'll see how that goes. It's not something I'm going to get a console over, though. They showed a DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which I'm not really interested in the DLC right now, because I haven't played Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Hell, I haven't played the first two Xenoblade Chronicles games, Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X, for those of you who don't know. And so I have some catching up to do on that. They showed a couple of Pokemon games called Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which I have absolutely no interest in whatsoever, because I don't give a single solitary crap about Pokemon. They showed Super Mario Party for the Switch, another Mario Party game, yay. And they showed a new Fire Emblem game called Three Houses. Now, I like Fire Emblem, but I'm not going to get a console for it. I'm going to wait until other things are on the console that I'm interested in before I go ahead and pick up Fire Emblem Three Houses. I actually may go ahead and pick up the game itself while it's still available, because that's one of the nastier problems about the Fire Emblem series, because Nintendo tends to not print enough copies of the games, and as a result, you end up with shortages and people price gouging up the wazoo. So that gets pretty irritating, and you kind of have to get it while the getting's good. Anyway, moving on. They had an expansion for Splatoon 2, which I don't really care about because I'm definitely not going to get a Switch just for Splatoon. And they had the big thing for this particular Nintendo Direct being Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Like I said, pretty much everything up until then was stuff they had already talked about, or stuff that has been announced on other systems and is just getting ported, or stuff that was already released and is just getting a Switch re-release. But then they spent the latter roughly half or so of the Nintendo Direct talking about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is their entry for the Switch, and is still not enough for me to get a Switch. It's one of those instances of, don't get me wrong, I like Super Smash Bros., I just don't like it that much. So while it was nice seeing some of the upcoming changes, and the fact that the roster for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate includes every character from every Smash game thus far, it's not something that really got me super excited, because that's the problem with Nintendo. They're fighting an uphill battle at this point, because there aren't really all that many games worth playing on the Switch exclusively, because what would I play on it? I've already got Breath of the Wild on the Wii U, so why would I get it on the Switch? And then most of the games that are coming out that are Switch exclusives are things like Mario Tennis Aces, which I don't really care about. It's a tennis game, even though it is a Mario game. And things like ARMS or 1-2 Switch and all that sort of thing. that are either gimmicky or just not anywhere near enough to justify getting a console for. And until they get enough games exclusively on the Switch that I actually want to pick one up, I'm not going to pick one up. I mean, it took me a long time to pick up a 3DS, for example, because there wasn't really enough on the system that really made me want to pick it up until several years into the actual lifetime of the 3DS, when they had finally gotten some really interesting games out for it. That's basically my rule of thumb with any console or handheld. If there aren't enough exclusives on it to justify picking up the system, then I'm not going to pick up the system. And since basically everything I'm seeing for the Switch is either a re-release of a previous game, or a simultaneous release of a new game, or just something from Nintendo that I'm really not interested in, or at least I'm not interested enough to buy the console for it, I don't see myself getting a Switch anytime soon. So that was pretty much the entirety of E3 right there. They did have a few miscellaneous announcements. For example, Dead or Alive 6 got announced. But for one, I haven't even played the 5th game yet, and for another, it's a fighting game, and it's going to have the same shitty DLC practices that most other fighting games have right now, which means that there's not really a lot of reason to pick it up on launch. You're better off just waiting for whatever release of the game includes all the DLC. They'll probably call it Dead or Alive 6 Ultimate or something like that, because that's kind of been the running theme with their releases. But just wait until then, and that's probably when I'm going to pick it up. Although, let's be fair here, I could pretty much say the exact same thing about just about any fighting game out there right now, so that's actually kind of a sad state of affairs. Anyway, the point is here that the only things I'm really looking forward to in full are Cyberpunk 2077 and kind of Ghost of Tsushima. But other than that, there's not really a whole lot that I was really interested in throughout the entirety of the conference. And what I was interested in, I'm not all that excited for, because it's either stuff that's a re-release on a different system, or it's stuff that, while it might be interesting, just doesn't really seem to justify picking up at full price. And the sad part is, I can't really say that's all that much of a problem, because while it's certainly disappointing that there's not a huge amount to look forward to in the coming year, well, I've got plenty of stuff in my backlog that I can work on, so I'll just work on that instead. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and stay tuned. I'm going to get my Redguard review up later in the week, and then we'll go on back to the regular schedule after that. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in later videos.